And if you think the only legend that's good is starring Tom Cruise, then you are ready for this episode of Discography Discussion. I am Joe, that is Dan, that is Jeff. Why are we talking about Saviour Machine?
I thought we were doing the Cannibal Corpse episode revisited.
The part that's not censored for YouTube?
No, I just loved it so fucking much, I wanted to do it again.
Cannibal Corpse has released 6 albums since we did that episode last week.
Entirely possible.
Oh, and they fired Corpse Grinder and Barnes is back in the band now.
Oh, fuck that. No, I'm not interested anymore.
This actually might be the first gothic band we've talked about on the show.
We just talked about Virgin Black like 3 weeks ago.
I stand corrected.
So one of our listeners, Mr. George Rivera, requested Saviour Machine. And if you'd like to request a band too, you can definitely hit us up via email, danandjoeshow@gmail.com, and we will take a listen and decide whether we want to cover that band or not.
Okay, well, I'm telling everybody right now, you need to let us know what you want as long as it's November's Doom, because I really want to do that episode.
What a democracy we have going on here. No, I would say pretty much up to this point, we've accepted and covered most of the listener submissions so far. If we haven't gotten to a band you've suggested yet, trust me, they're on the list. The goal is eventually to get to everybody. I mean, poor George asked us to talk about Saviour Machine like 6 months ago. And I was like, dude.
It was on the list.
I'm like, dude, it's on the list. We're going to get to it in like 6 months to 2 years. Something like that. When George asked us to talk about Saviour Machine, I decided to take a page from our good friend Lauren Kozlowski from the Roach Coach podcast, and I asked him to write us an email just telling us what he loves about the band, when he saw the band the first time, and what is it about Saviour Machine that makes them his favorite band. And this was his response. George writes, I first heard Carnival of Souls from Saviour Machine 1 in August of 1993 when the album was released. After that song finished, I was hooked. The band's look in the photos in the CD and the Saviour Machine 1 album cover intrigued me. However, when I heard the music to Carnival, I knew Saviour Machine were unlike anything I'd ever heard before or since. Nobody has ever come close in Christian music. At Cornerstone 2001, no question, it was my first and only time seeing them live. It was the best show that covered their entire career. They had just released Legend Part 3-1 at the festival the day of the show. I had to stand on a folding chair for the entire show, almost 3 hours, to get the pictures that I have. As an extra bonus, years later, I happened to receive a CDR audio copy of the show recorded from the board. Got it from a guy who had it along with several other rare Saviour Machine shows on CDR and DVD-R. In addition, Eric's lyrics and writing style have kept my interest as a fan after 25 years. Getting to know him on a personal level as a friend over the last 17 years since I met him at Cornerstone has really been cool as well. I don't know him as well as some do, but I still treasure our friendship. I'm glad Eric and the rest of the band are back together and making new music. They have definitely been missed. Well, thank you so much, George.
Thank you very much.
George actually established several years ago a online community called Christian Rock and Metal Fellowship, and I'll throw a link in the show notes if that's something that you're interested in.
Do they feature Jesus and the Flaming Tacos?
They don't. That's some pretty obscure stuff, Joe. I mean, I still have it.
Can I get a copy of that?
No.
He has to be superior to you in somehow, some way, and that's how he's going to do it.
It's the only reason I get Joe to do any work for us at all. Is he's like, man, I really don't want to edit all of your guys' bullshit for 3 hours. Yeah, but Joe, I'll burn you a copy of Jesus and the Flaming Tacos. Well, okay, but you have to do it this time. That was 88 episodes ago.
Wow, we made it to 89. 100's coming around the corner.
Coming around the corner.
Do we have plans for that yet?
I got some cool stuff lined up. And whenever I say NJ, I want you to know I'm not talking about New Jersey.
Well, before we start talking about New Jersey, I want to take this time to say thank you to everyone for listening to the podcast. Thank you for listening and for subscribing. If you are not a subscriber, you can find everything Discography Discussion at discussmetal.com. We are on Spotify, Apple and Google Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher. So if you have an Amazon Echo or a Google Home, you have no excuse. Ask it to play the latest episode of the Discography Discussion podcast, and it will. We're also on Facebook and on Twitter at discussmetal. Be sure to like, favorite, and subscribe. It really helps us out. It lets us know you're listening, and now Dan is going to tell us all about 5-star reviews.
We love 5-star reviews here on Discography Discussion, and the reason we like them is they make us feel good inside. Warm and gooey. Like a half melted piece of Halloween candy
that I'm still going to eat.
I was going to say like melting cake.
Yeah, it is. It makes you feel warm and gooey inside. But the best part about ratings and reviews is that it gives people confidence that our podcast is actually a real thing that people listen to, which allows algorithms to pick us up and recommend us to other people that might be interested in what we're doing. So in a lot of ways, giving us a review or a rating is the best thing you can do to help out a podcast.
Yeah, that means you also get to eventually get more content.
And get tons more content, man.
If you want to pay $1 on Patreon right now, you can get more content right now.
Yeah, I mean, how many Patreon episodes have we released so far?
25 and counting, with 21 at least to come from you.
Yeah, and can I please just take a moment to shout out some of our most loyal patrons, including Alexander, Jake Barrett, and Jeffrey Santos.
The actual Mac.
These guys are amazing. They are all about what we do here on Discography Discussion, and they get all of the inside scoop on everything we're doing. A lot of these guys I talk to on a regular basis on Messenger, and we really couldn't do this without you guys, so we really appreciate it.
For all of our other patrons that are supporting us at the $1 tier, thank you very much. It is absolutely appreciated, and we hope you're enjoying those single album reviews.
So, guys, we did a Cannibal Corpse episode.
Finally!
It was magic.
It was majestic. There was a lot of beeping.
Yeah, I'll try better not to fart during the episodes.
We were edited.
Oh, that. Yes.
I feel very violated by how edited I was.
Yeah, I thought we were like in a free country.
Yeah, but we were definitely edited by the man.
Yeah, we are in Joe's studio, so
the machine. That being said,
Joe's a machine,
which is the only time I'm going to say that on this episode.
I've got him trained.
We got some listener feedback. Melissa from the Good Evening Kitties podcast commented, "Nothing says I'm a professional like meat hook sodomy," which is a quote from Jeff.
Oh. That was fun.
My partner in crime, Mr. John Beatty from John's Untitled Podcast, also commented, "Sometimes you cover bands that I'm just too overwhelmed to even dive into, given how much of a catalog the band has. This is one of those bands. I hate Chris Barnes as a vocalist. Is it safe to say that Chris Barnes is the mushroom head of death metal? I enjoy George Fisher on Josta's podcast and feel like that's a dude who can be corpse grinder for the band, but is just a dude who loves claw crane games and doesn't take himself too seriously. Some of the music in the background for the more recent albums swayed me to check out some of those tunes. Not saying I'm a new fan, but I now know what albums to stay away from. So thank you for doing Satan's gory work for me. John, literally, buddy, I would do anything for you, including listening to tons and tons of Cannibal Corpse and Mushroom Head."
Oh, Mushroom Head, that was probably a chore for you guys. I have to admit that I don't feel bad for missing that one.
Hey, guys, can't wait to come back to the podcast. Who are we talking about this week? That's Mushroom Head, Jeff. Oh, I got some shit I got to go do.
Yeah, I don't think it was too far from that.
That I got to go do. Yeah.
I think that's kind of how that shit went down.
Oh, no.
It was genuinely a pleasure doing the Cannibal Corpse episode, and the listen that week, didn't expect that to happen. But this week, it's Saviour Machine.
Save your machine.
So, Dan,
just save them.
Tell me about Saviour Machine.
They suck.
Oh, man.
Will that be your final thought, Jeff?
I think it was just done. No,
episode over.
Get out of my house.
Everybody. Oh, my goodness. So, Saviour Machine is a Christian gothic metal band who started in 1989. They released a demo, but the first album that most people know from Saviour Machine is their, I guess it's self-titled if you throw a 1 after the name of your band, right? Because the first album's literally just called Saviour Machine 1, 1993, I believe.
This caught me off guard on first listen. I got a Bowie vibe out of it with a little bit of new wave.
Total Bowie, new wave vibe, a bit of symphonic elements mixed in. I dug it. I really, really like it. But then again, I'm a huge dork when it comes to new wave. Like, that's my shit. Like, if I'm not listening to metal, there's a high probability that new wave is being pumped out of my speakers.
My only real complaint with this album is the constant wankery that is the, I'm going to call it lead guitar. There is something unpleasant to constantly playing high notes on the guitar like a sloppy lead guitarist. As a musician, that pulled me out of it a little bit, but I got a little used to it and I started to ignore it, and I actually like this record.
Yeah,
1993, you could have told me this was 87 and probably got away with it.
This was a cool listen for me because when I first got into like Christian metal, like that's all I was allowed to listen to for a number of years, this was definitely the most different thing that I had heard. Because before that, I mean, I'm listening to shit like Deliverance and Tourniquet and Early Mortification and stuff like that. And so when somebody's like, hey, have you heard Saviour Machine? I'm like, no, let's check it out. I'd look at the cover and I was like, I have no idea what's going on with this like crying mask floating in space, but you know, let's try it. And I didn't know what to think of the vocals. The first thing I thought was, my God, this guy's a really good singer. Like, and he just carries it. I love kind of the dark gothy feel of it. This album's not nearly as dark as where they would go later. This is still pretty light, you know, like Jeff was saying, more new wave sounding. And I really enjoyed the melodies, though, more than anything, just the overall feel. You know, there's piano on this. There's synthesizers and things like that. And it all sounds really good. To Joe's point, too, I do think that the guitar work is a little bit off in places. And it's not even that it's bad. It's just a little too much sometimes. And that's interesting because that's very much in contrast to what they would later on go to do. Yeah,
well, that's part of the new wave vibe. I mean, if you listen to a lot of the, like Echo and the Bunnymen is the first thing that kind of pops into my head on this first album. Is, you know, similar baritone vocalist and with really cool vibrato and all that kind of jazz and cheesy guitars. I mean, you can't beat it with, you know, throw in some synth and piano and layered vocals. I mean, you got new wave. It's great. I love this stuff. I eat it up.
I was getting some anime vibes while listening to this. I wanted to run home and watch Vampire Hunter D again.
Ooh.
Because it was Halloween after all.
This band would do great just making anime like theme songs.
You know what's funny that we mentioned that? Because I actually did think a lot about that later on. And I also felt that way like when I was listening to some of the Legend stuff. I was like, man, this could actually be a JRPG soundtrack. That's actually what was going through my head. It's so funny you guys mentioned that. That's because we didn't actually talk about that part ahead of time.
Well, it takes itself very seriously, much like a lot of that Japanese melodrama stuff does as well, so it fits.
Especially the bubblegum anime.
Yeah, it fits overall. Saviour Machine really was doing something different in 93, I think, than what a lot of their peers were doing. And for that, I think they deserve credit because they had really cool lyrics and like this amazing stage show. Like, you know, Eric Clayton would wear makeup, you know, to his live performances and stuff, and the dude could deliver. If you're listening on Spotify or on like Google Music or something like that, they actually have a Live in Germany album. If there was ever any doubt in your mind that Eric Clayton was just doing all this through studio magic, like, he's not. This dude is the real deal. He sounds fantastic live. Some standout songs on this record for me was Killer, or The Killer, which is about 10 minutes long, which sounds like it would drone on and on, but it really doesn't. It's actually pretty interesting. And it almost gives me a little bit of an old Iron Maiden vibe. Like, it's that metal. Like, it's probably as hard as they go.
Yes.
And I love that song. I love The Wicked Widow a lot. And there's no denying Carnival of Souls as one of the best album openers for this kind of music.
Yeah, Carnival of Souls I don't know where I've heard it or who introduced it to me.
It seems very familiar, doesn't it? Even the first time you've heard it.
Yeah, and I think I'm guessing it's probably going to go back to my Missouri Baptist days when I had a couple of friends that went there and I hung out with them. I'm assuming that it was probably somebody there in the 90s that showed it to me. And that song probably stuck, and I'm just trying to figure out where the heck I got it from, and that's probably...
So you go in, you're like, hey, what's up, guys? And you look at them, and they're all wearing white makeup. And you're like, dude, what are you guys going? You guys going to see Kiss or something? They're like, no, fuck you, Saviour Machine.
Well, they were mostly music majors, so it does...
So they were going to see Phantom of the Opera then.
Is there a difference? Seriously, I'd go see Phantom of the Opera with Eric Clayton as the Phantom.
Oh, yeah.
Like, for sure.
Now that you mention that, I'm surprised we haven't seen it at some point.
That'd be amazing. I'd love that.
Yeah,
you know what else I loved? Saviour Machine 2.
Yes, you did. I can't remember. This is the album that actually had the excerpts from Carmina Burana and from, was it Bram Stoker's Dracula that they did from the movie clips? I was trying to replace it, and I ran out of time this week to actually track down which movie those audio clips are taken from.
I feel like it might have been Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Okay, yeah, because they were
it's been such a long time since I've seen that movie, and I've seen almost every iteration of Dracula, so some of that stuff gets mixed together for me.
Right.
I bet George knows.
George, let us know which movie that's from, because it's driving me nuts, but I just haven't had time to figure it out this week.
The only real downside to this album for me is that the symphonic elements are artificial. Get 5 union musicians for a day and just record that. And I feel like this would be so much more impactful. But I still like it. It's basically the last album, again.
I disagree. I think it's like 3 times as good as the first album.
Yeah, outside of a couple standout tracks on the first album, on 1, 2 is better, in my opinion.
Huge step up in the production department. The first album sounds kind of light to me. I don't think anything really hits hard on the first Saviour Machine album, and I honestly think it's a case that the production quality was holding them back. They didn't have those kind of problems on Saviour Machine 2, and so everything sounds a lot more full, and it all sounds mixed a lot better. And to what Joe was saying about the first album, that lead guitar is kept in check better on Saviour Machine 2. I do think that they do give off the same vibe, but I think musically, this is a lot more interesting. Enter the Idol.
Great track.
That song, like, just with its really weird tempo, like right off the top, and that really carries through the song. There was nothing like that on Saviour Machine 1. Like, this was a whole different direction, and it was kind of new and interesting for a band that I sometimes feel like goes on a little bit longer than they should.
There's a few times where I get a jam band vibe. Like, the band just started playing that one idea that kind of sounded cool, and the singer pops up and says, no, just keep doing that. Like, don't change it. And then he sits there and sings for 20 minutes, and then they say, yeah, that's a really good idea. We should work on that. No, that is the song.
If he was like that in the old days, that might be why they were able to put out albums in a good, consistent time frame. You know, where he was like, no, this sounds good, let's just go with it. That definitely will become a problem later on when he is never satisfied with what they have laid down on tape. But I mean, Saviour Machine 2 was, in my opinion, probably their peak. Like, I feel like they took the ideas that they had on the first album and expanded on them in almost every way. And the only complaint I have about the first 2 Saviour Machine albums is I feel like some of them could have had some tracks left off, and it would have been okay.
Especially the second one.
I just think as collective whole, all their albums are like at least an hour and 10 minutes long. And as an album listener, man, they turned me into a fucking marathon man.
Yeah, I did a lot of driving this week, and it was like I had an hour and a half drive from here to where I was working.
There's one album.
Yeah, like I'm like, oh, cool, I'm listening to Saviour Machine 2. And then, like, I pull up to the job site an hour and a half later, and I'm still listening to Saviour Machine 2.
That part I don't like about
this,
And
there's still 2
though.
tracks left.
It's not bad. It's almost directionless.
Yeah, it does meander. There's no question about that.
They use a lot
Meander
of
is the perfect word,
Yeah.
Jeff. Thank you very much.
Yeah, they use a lot of the same vibes.
Maybe if we weren't sitting down and being critical listeners, you think we'd be more tolerable, especially of the Legend stuff that's about ready to come up?
I think with this band, and I'm mentally preparing myself to talk about the Legend stuff, but I think there would have been more benefit to listening to the records as they were released. As Saviour Machine 1 was like 3 years before Saviour Machine 2. And then I think Legend was along the same time frame. There was a few years in between. And that's about how long I think it takes you to digest a Saviour Machine album. Like, you kind of have to have it in your rotation, listen to it every couple of months or every couple of weeks or something.
Yeah, because they're epics.
Yeah, and you can really just get into certain songs and ideas. Like, there's a song on Saviour Machine 2 called The Stand that's like 16 minutes long. And it's a great song, but I don't want to hear that and the rest of the album.
Right.
You know, so it's like I have to pick one. I'm either skipping The Stand and I'm listening to the rest of the album as a whole and reducing the playtime by 16 minutes, which helps a lot.
You're still at an hour.
You're still at an hour, but I'm okay with an hour. I'm not okay with an hour and 16 minutes or an hour and 20 minutes, especially with what we do here on this podcast. Ain't nobody got time for that shit. Like, it is just too much. We're used to listening to albums that are like 30 to 45 minutes each. Done.
Yeah, as soon as we start to get over the 50-minute range, I tend to get antsy. And I'm like, how much longer is... that's kind of the thought that pops in my head. And I'm like, how many more songs are left? I'm like, oh shit, I didn't even look. There's like 18 fucking songs on this album.
I had the same moment this week where I could have sworn that an hour had gone by, and I knew these were longer records because they came out in the 90s. I'd look down and it's on track 4. What the actual fuck? And I set myself up for failure. Because this is one of the problems I have with gothic metal of this type, and anything that could be the soundtrack to anime. Gothic metal to me is not music that's epic because it's telling a story. It's kind of like music for what you're looking at. Whereas death metal would be intense and it's about the energy of what's going on in front of you, and it's about somebody fucking's gonna die. Gothic metal is like, look at that castle. Look at it. Look at the castle, Jeff.
No, now really look at it.
Now look at it. Now, do you see that guy riding a horse that's half robot? Yeah. Look at that.
Look at him.
Look at that. That's what this music feels like it's about. I don't know what they're trying to tell me because what I'm listening to is just about something.
All right, Jeff, I think Joe's ready for the Camelot episode.
Oh, okay. Yeah, down with it, man.
That's what it sounds like to me.
With bands like this, that you can consider as, somebody droning on. Like, I love Swallow the Sun. I understand Swallow the Sun is not for everybody because they are pretentious, they meander, and they're about ready to put out a 7-hour-long record. So I get it. I love that stuff, but I don't expect everybody else to partake in my fandom because it takes a special kind of someone, and it has to hit you just right. Like, if you see them live or something like that, and it just kind of grabs you, and you're like, these guys are so charismatic, they can't do anything wrong live. I have mad respect for them, so I'm going to listen to everything that they do. Because I actually have a couple of artists that are like that. Like, I'm not a big rock guy, but Lenny Kravitz, unbelievable stage performance. Probably one of the best I've ever seen in my life. So, I mean, you never know. And I think that's kind of how it is on this. It just didn't grab me personally.
Well, yeah, and I think that, the big stage production that would come along with a band like Saviour Machine, you're just sitting there, maybe you're at a festival or something, and, some other bands have played, and then this band comes out, and they've got the smoke machines, they've got props up on stage. Dude comes out with makeup, bald head, he's got makeup all over his whole face, and he's got like blood, dripping down, from his eyes and shit, and he sings this well, and it's like so orchestrated and so well planned and perfect in every way. All you can go away with is, I just witnessed greatness on stage. Like, this is like the hype and the vibe and all of it work so well with the music that they produce that it just, I can understand how this band could probably today, we could go see this band today and be like,
hell yeah,
man, maybe we were a little harsh on those Legend albums. You know, like, honestly.
Well, yeah. That's how I was with Lenny Kravitz whenever I saw him live. I was, I got free tickets and I'm like, well, it's a show.
It's got to be the only reason people like Mushroom Head. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah. But no, he
as opposed to Degrease.
He hit me, and I was a huge fan, and I look back and I'm like, maybe I was a little too tough on his music, and I started listening to it, started getting into the deep tracks on Mama Said, and became a huge fan.
History has shown, though, anybody can be presented wrong. How many times is a band that's not a pop band presented like the next pop band? Like Sum 41 isn't just straight thrash metal.
Right. It's kind of funny with Sum 41, which we'll talk about on an episode we do with him later. So here's a 10-second preview. You wouldn't expect a band like Sum 41 to play metal, but they do, and they're really good at it.
No, they're fantastic at it.
Yeah.
I mean, also, my 10 seconds, listen to Brown Brigade, which was kind of like the spinoff.
Yeah.
That's fantastic as well.
But how this refers to Saviour Machine is the presentation is spot on.
Right.
Like you're like, this is the greatest thing that I've ever heard. And you also have to put this under the microscope of it being Christian music. This is not something that was well received. There was actually a concert a while back where the Christians were so unsettled by Saviour Machine's music that they shut them down. Like they went on stage to play, and the venue they just pulled the plug. They literally pulled the plug and forced the band off the stage.
Thank you for the hype.
Because the makeup and the presentation and the blood and the lyrics and all that stuff just really left a bad taste in some conservative Christians' mouths.
You mean like a gothic play?
Kind of like that, yeah. And the funny thing about Saviour Machine, and something I thought really made them stand out on the early albums, was the lyrics could be interpreted a multitude of different ways. They had songs like Christians and Lunatics. They had a song called Killer. They had and even The Stand. Those songs aren't necessarily like Jesus, 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 Jesus. They are very dark songs about human nature, and they are ambiguous.
That was the word I was going to use.
Yeah, anybody can listen to it and say, I mean, obviously you get to the end of Saviour Machine 1 and they're like, Jesus Christ, we found blah, blah, and that's fine. But it doesn't take away the impact of what those original lyrics were. And I think as an ambiguous band, they made Christians uncomfortable, but they were maybe a little bit too Christian for people that weren't into Christianity. So those songs really helped out a lot in establishing the band as their own artistic expression and not necessarily just trying to sell your religion, which is something I'm going to revisit in a little while.
So what's the difference between being an ambiguous band and a generic band from a lyric standpoint?
Well, I think the lyrics are still really interesting.
Because you could interpret both scenarios many different ways.
Well, generic can still be blunt.
Well, generic, I think, is just
not blunt.
Yeah, generic is more unoriginal for me. Either you're copying what somebody else is doing, or your lyrics are so metaphorical that they don't mean anything. And I don't think that's the case with Saviour Machine at all. I think the songs are concise. I think they're original, but they're ambiguous. You could pull your own interpretation out of any of those songs.
Can't that be a bad thing, though?
It can be, I guess, if you only listen to music with a certain expectation. I definitely try hard to not come in with an expectation in mind.
But even if it comes off as something negative, you now have a talking point.
Right.
And that's kind of...
You can go talk about it on your music podcast when you're done.
Exactly. That's kind of our point. That's why we exist.
Yeah, and so right now, none of it's a bad thing. And then the Legend trilogy starts.
Oh.
Hey, I don't know what anyone's talking about. That movie Legend with Tom Cruise and Tim Curry, and he's that giant devil guy who's called Darkness.
Dude, you forgot Mia Sara. That's the best part of the whole movie.
Getting to Mia Sara. And Meg, thank you very much.
Don't talk about my girlfriend like that.
Mia Sara's your girlfriend?
Meg.
Oh.
Oh, man. That is a good movie.
It is a fantastic movie.
I wish we were actually talking about that.
Yeah.
From here on out, yeah,
we've been praising the band pretty consistently since we started because they were worth it. They were great.
Not anymore.
The Legend, Part 1. And you're already like, damn, I just spent $20 because this is like still the 90s, so the album's going to cost $20.
$14.99.
Maybe.
$17.13 with tax.
I used to pay $18.95 for CDs, brand new at Best Buy.
You think you could find this at Best Buy?
You might have been able to back
Really?
then.
Back in 97? I'd say so.
You'd have to order it.
Special
Like, you'd
order
have
it.
to find an employee and be like, I really want Saviour Machine Legend Part 1. And people probably said that back with Part 1.
Hey, Dan, let's check out this Sam Goody, see if they have Saviour Machine.
Hey, here's Jeff at Sam Goody. He's got what we're looking for. All right.
If not, I can order it.
Yeah, absolutely he can.
How much is that going to cost me?
Since my Sam Goody's not in a mall, not as expensive as the rest of the Sam Goodies. I was in a strip mall instead of in a regular old-fashioned mall.
Sweet.
So I would say $17.99.
We're trying really hard not to talk about this album. They had the gothic atmosphere before, but I still considered them at that time to be more of a guitar rock-driven band. Legend starts off with a song called Overture, and it's just, we're in, like, fucking Ben-Hur or something.
No, do not shit on Ben-Hur
I'm
like
not
that.
shitting on Ben-Hur.
I love Ben-Hur.
Ben-Hur's great, but it's not like a rock album either. So
if you give me a choice between a rock album and Ben-Hur, I'm probably going to choose Ben-Hur. So this is definitely not Ben-Hur for me.
well, that's fine. But what I'm trying to say is that
I know, I'm just messing with
this doesn't impact like Carnival of Souls did. It doesn't even impact like Saviour Machine 1 did on Saviour Machine 2. This band's really confusing when it comes to labeling shit. Because like you have Saviour Machine 1, the album, Saviour Machine 2, the album.
With a
but
song
that
called
album starts
Saviour
with
Machine
Saviour
1.
Machine 1 and then ends with Saviour Machine 2. And then we're going to get into like Legend Part 1, Legend Part 2, then Legend Part 3, Part 1. And it's just...
Oh, don't forget you got songs like Legend 1, 1, and then Legend 1, 2.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just like, okay.
Remember what we said about
17
ambiguous.
minutes. An hour and 17 minutes. And you know how we were talking about ambiguous lyrics? It's pretty clear that the Legend trilogy is about the end of the world.
End times.
From a very, very staunchly Christian perspective. And this is where the ambiguity that I liked about the band really takes a back seat.
Yep.
We're
It's
like
done.
straight up reading out of the Book of Revelation here.
Yeah, well, since we're talking about that, I said End Times. There's a great YouTube channel for anybody that wants to see like crazy Christian conspiracy crap. It's called Third Eagle: The Apocalypse.
And you can listen to Saviour Machine Legend Part 1 while you watch it.
And it is fantastic.
Is this a rock opera?
It's supposed to be.
Is it trying
fails.
to be?
This guy sat down, listened to Flash Gordon, or watched it, depending on what you had in your library at the time, and said, I could do that.
Flash. Perfect. That's if that doesn't stay in the podcast, I'll be very upset.
Two guys that actually know what falsetto is.
I guess it's just
It's
it's not that it doesn't sound like Saviour Machine.
Well, yeah, because his voice
Especially
is,
on this one. I think this still carries over a little bit from 2. This is probably the best album out of the Legend trilogy. You know, the 4-album trilogy.
Yeah, but that's not hard to do.
It's not hard to do, but keep in mind those albums didn't exist yet. So this just taken purely on its own laurels is pretty cool. I mean, The Eye of the Storm is a cool song.
I'm just
I'm
thinking,
really stretching to find more.
yeah, well, that's the biggest challenge is, we're almost at a loss for words because it's just like,
I've definitely fallen asleep a few times trying to listen to these.
yeah, that's exactly where I was at, especially on Legend 3 Part 2 or whatever the hell it is. There's a spot in there that I almost fell asleep, and then something that was a whoopsie woke me up and thought it was kind of funny.
We'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah, but I think this guy in his mind was thinking, I'm going to sell out stadiums and people are going to have their lighters out and waving them back and forth. But
About the end of the world.
about the end of the world.
See, that works really good when you're singing songs about, like, I loved her, but she was a bitch, and now I'm better off. You know, like, that works really well. Talking about generic lyrics. This is not generic, but it's not ambiguous either. And I think this firmly roots the band. Like, you listen to Saviour, you hear a couple of songs by Saviour Machine, and then let's say you go out and you buy this as the first release, and it kind of confirms what you already thought about Christian music, where it's like, man, these guys have a pretty interesting sound, but they don't know what to do with it. And I think that is the biggest issue with the Legend trilogy, is it's trying to take a sound that we discussed earlier was a little bit more meandering and a little bit more about a vibe, but now you're trying to craft it into this very specific type of concept that you're trying to portray. And I don't think it really works as well as maybe people think it works or the band thinks it works. And so I thought Legend Part 1 was okay. And then Legend Part 2 I actually got for free from a radio station that me and Buddy were doing a show for. I ended up getting a copy of Legend Part 2. And this is even more rock opera. Really, there's really no other nice way to put it. It's up its own ass. Like, it really is. Like,
There's a lot more opera than rock. There's not.
And it's not that Eric Clayton can't pull it off as a singer. He can pull it off, but I don't know if opera is the right sound for him. I think his voice can be described as operatic, but to sustain another like 120-minute album, it's just almost asking a little too much from the listener. And I get tired of hearing it after, like, because if these albums were condensed down, like I said, to about 40 minutes each, they might be more enjoyable because it's just hitting on the key points. But the meandering is still there, but now it's being sold to us as if it's something intentional. And it just kind of drones on and on and on. And again, like I said earlier, this may have been more tolerable if you were listening to the releases consecutively as they were released over time. There is a lot to unpack in these albums, and maybe we're just missing it.
Well, but
it's hard to just sit down and listen for this long.
Yeah, I'll put it this way. On my second listen through, 2 minutes in, there's another 7 minutes of the song. Skip.
Yeah, there's a lot of that.
I did that more on these last 3 albums than I think I have on any other episode that we've done.
Well, and we were saying that on the first 2, even, that we had issues with that, but we at least liked those. You know, like, they were still interesting enough. But, like, it's like some of the worst aspects of power metal sometimes, where you're, like, trying to listen to this album, but, like, you're getting constantly interrupted by the concept. Like, just so much, like, spoken word going on, where it's like, ha, 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 and then I'm going to tell you this thing that happened, and then these people went to this place, and then the Antichrist, and then...
Well said, by the way.
It gets
interrupted by the concept.
Yeah, all the time. Like, it just pulls you out of it.
Initially, I liked The Legend Part 1 more than the second record, not because it sounded better, but it took that sound that had been repeated over 2 records and did something different with it. And all I thought was, if we could bring the production value a little bit up, like we did on the last album, and bring the symphony, or the synthony, as I'm going to call it, because none of this is real.
The synthony. I love it.
I love it,
That
too.
needs to go on a shirt, by the way.
Symphony X.
I'm in a synthetic metal band.
Jeff.
Yes.
We got an idea there. I wanted less of the fake and more of the real, because that's why I don't listen to gothic metal. It's mainly a guy with a keyboard and a computer, and then he has an actual band.
Studio.
Didn't we just explain the last 3 albums here?
Yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up, dude. A guy with a keyboard, and like some friends that stop by every now and again and drop some guitar lines in, and that sort of stuff.
You got that track done? You want me to lay something down for you?
Well, I think Legend 1 came out, and it was like, this is great. And then by the time you start getting into Legend Part 2 and 3, it's like, what'd you guys think of that other record? Oh, it was great. Yeah, well, the next one's going to be even bigger. Bigger, more. Like, there's so many simultaneous audio tracks going on in each song that after a while it starts sounding completely unbelievable. And I think that once you're just, like, balls deep in it, like you're creating it, and you're just more and more, bigger. I think sometimes you start getting so enraptured with the vibe of all of it that you kind of start losing focus of what you're actually here to do.
You're not saying anything. You're creating a vibe.
You're creating a vibe. And again, we said that was a little bit of a detriment on the first two Saviour Machine albums, but it was reined in. It is not reined in because, and I think something Joe says all the time is that it sounded like a band on the first two albums. And even on Legend Part 1, it sounds still like a band. But you start getting into Legend Part 2 and Legend Part 3, 1, and you're like, this sounds like one dude is calling all the shots and has a very specific vision of what he wants to accomplish. And I know that there are people out there that love these albums. And I do think that they put off kind of a cool end-of-the-world vibe. But I'm having trouble understanding why you can't write a concept record about the end of the world in an hour and 20 minutes. And you just call it Saviour Machine Legend and then move on to the next thing.
Yeah, instead of having almost 5 hours of it.
Yeah, because, like, I mean, I take issue, like, I like the Harry Potter movies. Did Deathly Hallows really have to be 2 movies?
Yes.
They couldn't have just made one long movie?
Nope. I was happy they did that. They were able to keep more of the book in it because of it. But I might be in the minority because of that. I love the books. I read the books well before I watched the movies.
Well, I'm just saying that, like, it bothers me, like in Star Wars. Let's say, we get to episode 9 and they're like, well, this is episode 9.0 and the next one is 9.5. Like, just keep extending it out.
So we can have more Death Stars.
Right. And so I just don't think that it works with a band like this because you're talking about the end of the world, but the world won't end. It's like the Land Before Time. I think can't. Is time ever going to start, guys?
Yeah, I know.
Like, you're 19 movies in now. Like, I mean, when's time going to start?
I think this dude's in denial.
Well, we're going to get into that because Legend Part 3, 1 was pretty much officially the band's last album. And again, you guys liked that? You liked Legend Part 3, Part 1?
No.
The next one's going to be even better. It's going to be bigger and better, and it's like trying to build a gigantic castle, and just you keep adding rooms to it over and over and over until it just becomes so big that you get lost and eventually die. Like, you die building the castle because you could never get out of it. You made it into such a huge labyrinth of rooms and doors, and that's how I feel about the Legend trilogy. Is that it's like you've built up this huge thing in your mind, but it's actually a detriment to you because eventually you're going to want to go so big that you can't anymore.
Not only do you have this massive castle with a labyrinth of rooms, the biggest problem is this fucking castle is built on sand.
It's built on a vibe.
Yeah, it's built on sand. It's built in denial. You know at this point that it's a bad idea, but you've invested so much time and so much effort, you're just going to, instead of just starting from scratch and doing it right, you're just going to keep adding to the mistake because you think if you keep adding to it, it'll eventually get better and it'll right itself. And that's not the case on these albums.
Because I'm so burned out by the concept. I was complaining about getting interrupted by the concept back in Legend Part 2. And now you're like, well, now you've got at least this much to go. It's kind of like being at work. And you're like, okay, I get off at 3 o'clock, and then the boss is like, hey, gonna need you to stay till 5:30. And you're like, okay. And then 5:30 rolls around, and like the building's dark, and like you're the only one there, and you're like, oh, I guess I'm gonna go ahead and leave. And then the boss stands at the doorway and goes, where the hell do you think you're going? Well, you said 5:30, gonna need you to stay till tomorrow morning. Like, that's what this feels like. It's like, okay, are we done yet? Is the world ended? Has Jesus come back now and saved? Because that's your whole point, right? The world's a fucked up place. They wrote the book of Revelation, as part of the Bible, and Jesus is eventually going to come back and take all the people that are saved and send all the people that aren't saved to hell. Like, that's your concept? And I just summed up your concept in, 23 seconds?
Another way to look at that is,
how
long does it take you to actually read the book of Revelation?
Oh, man.
I think they actually wrote the Book of Revelations faster than he wrote the last 4 albums.
So, what are we thinking? 120 minutes times 4?
Yeah, that's 82 minutes times 4 divided by 60.
So that's 480 minutes.
Do you think, Dan, reader of books, that you can read the Book of Revelation in less than 8 hours?
I think I could probably handle it.
Doesn't that mean then he's doing it wrong?
Well, so it's bigger and better, bigger and better, bigger and better, bigger and better, saying it's like the next album's going to be perfect. It's going to sum it all up. All of our wildest dreams are going to come true. All the listeners are going to go to heaven instantly after they hear this. And everybody also gets $1 million just by listening to this album. Like, that's almost the type of hype that this record had going for it, at least in his mind. But then just years went by.
Senile.
Years went by and there was no album. And then some more years went by and there was no album. And he kept being like, no, it's great, it's great, it's great. Buy my t-shirts. It's great. It's going to come out, I promise.
Yes,
it's
listen to my voice.
It's just that it takes so long. Yeah, and that works the first couple times. Like, he sings you a little song, and you're like, okay, it's all going to be okay. Or he shows you like a 10-second clip of what he's working on, and you're like, well, that sounds pretty good because it's only 10 seconds and not an hour.
17-minute
right.
long song.
Correct.
Reminds me of when Trans-Siberian Orchestra released Night Castle.
But he literally waited so long to produce an album that the record label started being like, Eric, dude, where's this album? Like, we need it to come out like 2 years ago. And I think every time they would say that, he'd be like, I just need more money. It's got to be bigger. It's got to be better. It's got to be greater. I got to have more money. It's gonna be great. And I legitimately believe that he spent all that time working on the album. That he probably had that fucker done in like a year and was just like, no, it's not good enough. I gotta make it better. I gotta make it bigger. It's got to be better than Legend Part 3, Part 1. Eventually, the record label's like, dude, we need a return on our investment. Like, this record's got to come out in some form. We can't just we can't just sit there and meander and let him take our money and never give us anything back in return. That's not how this is not how this deal works. The record label takes all the demos from Legend Part 3, Part 2 and cobbles together a release. They take it all. They have independent engineers come in and cut all the vocal takes, all the guitar, the synths, everything. They cobble it all together into like an 18-track album or a 17-track album, and they just put it out as Legend Part 3, Part 2.
Wow. How do you think he felt on Tuesday?
I know exactly how he felt, and I'm going to read you exactly how he felt.
Where is this from?
Well, this is from the official Saviour Machine website that is no longer up anymore, but there's this amazing website called the Wayback Machine.
Archive.org saves the day.
And I was able to pull up Eric Clayton's original statements on this release. This CD has been illegally produced / manufactured. It is in fact a fraud, a crime against you, the consumer. Laughter separates us from despair and gives us the ability to love. Quoted as unknown. I guess that was okay back in 2011, but it's kind of not okay to just give quotes and no credits. Anyway, Eric says, hello friends. If you're reading this, I'll assume you're truly interested in knowing the facts about this unauthorized release, calling itself Legend Part 3, Part 2. If you've already purchased a copy of this monstrosity, my heart truly goes out to you. I wish there was some way I could take it back, but you'll have to ask the producers and manufacturers of this bootleg for a refund, if you'd like one. Yes, that was a not-so-very subtle suggestion to demand your money back. This is only a basic outline of a far more detailed, nuanced, and complicated story. Almost all of the full background behind this current situation is covered with extensive detail in my recently published book, Cha-ching! To avoid this statement becoming a novel itself, I'll have to encourage you to read my collective journals sometime if you're already interested in the full complexities of the background. So without further ado, here are the basic facts about this particular CD release. MCM Music and Massacre Records have manufactured / released a version of Part 3-2. This version is more of a compilation of what I consider to be random outtakes and demo recordings from 2004. This CD is grossly incomplete and unrepresentative of what 3-2 actually sounds like today. What I can deduce from this CD is the following. MCM and or Massacre Records decided to hire a few very bad engineers to go through hundreds of takes from recordings I did in Sweden in spring of 2004 These unknown engineers chose some takes, tried to put something together, and attempted to mix something out of it. Basically, recordings from 2004 have evolved into demo recordings as far as I'm concerned. Since those sessions, I have re-recorded almost everything. I have more than 7,000 hours recorded, choosing final takes and edits. This CD is not 3.2, not even close. It is so incomplete, it is difficult to even call it a demo. Some of what was recorded in Sweden is actually being used on the real album. About 45% of the guitars recorded will be on the album. About 35% of the drums Thomas recorded will be used. Only 30% of the vocals I recorded will be used. And not a single vocal you hear on this CD is the actual vocals I've chosen. Here's a fairly comprehensive list of technical facts all Saviour Machine fans should know. Now, I'm not going to read all of these, but the one that's the most interesting to me is one that has a joke vocal take. He goes, the vocals they choose and attempted to edit were done so poorly, there's actually a joke vocal which they missed and failed to edit out. It takes place on the song The Final Rebellion. To explain, after botching a vocal take at the end of a line, I yelled, "Yeehaw! Giddy up, Satan! Come on now!" This was my way of letting the guitarist know to stop the take. I have made a mistake in the lyric, and this should give you an idea of the severe lack of attention to detail during their editing process. It is a joke. Tell me, how bad of an engineer do you have to be to completely miss a joke vocal and leave it in the final mix? To me, the moment/occurrence is the perfect example of how badly the CD was thrown together and just how poorly it was produced. This accident is actually my favorite moment on the entire CD. It's hilarious, and it's just one hilarious moment of many. Now, there's a lot more to this than what I just read. If you want to read all of it, we're going to link it in the show notes for you guys to check out. It is a pretty interesting story.
I'm going to stop you there and say vocal takes that I did back in 2004. When was that published?
2011.
So for 7 years, you've been sitting on a finished album?
He says it's not finished.
What the fuck have you been doing for 7 years?
He says...
Dude, if you...
We're laughing because we just heard the yeehaw.
We heard the giddy up Satan.
Yeehaw.
7,000 takes?
7,000 hours. That's like, there's no way that's a real number.
I believe one of the things that you should do more of is sing it again. Sing it again. Get frustrated. Do something creative that has energy, that has some lack of thought behind it. It's missing in modern music. But 7,000 hours? Jeff, do some fast math, please, and tell me how many days of your life that would be to comb through. And then think about how it took that much time just to record it. What are you doing? Did you wake up every day for a year straight and sing your album and then say, I'm going to go back and listen to all of it and pick the best ones? I can't get 7 years here.
It's got to be bigger and better, Joe.
Well, let me put it this way. 7,000 hours is almost 292 days.
Straight.
So that's almost a year.
Now let's multiply that by 3 and turn that into how many 8-hour days would it take? You know, like a actual job?
It's 875 days.
So 3 years of your life working 7 days a week, and now you're going to comb over it and find the good ones? Dan, what am I doing wrong?
I think he already did comb over it. I think what Eric's trying to tell us in this long rant, because it's a rant.
I got fucked.
I got fucked over. I took a really long time to record this album, but I did it for you, the listener. I did it all for you. I did it all for the money. I mean, I did it all for you. He's doing it for us, right? The listener, the guys that loved Legend Part 1 and Part 2 and Part 3, Part 1. I mean, I don't know who those people are, but I do know they exist. They're somewhere. I'm sure there are people that just eat up everything that they do, and that's totally fine. This is too much, dude. Like, it shouldn't take you this many years to put on an album, because if this is on the same level as Legend Part 3, Part 1, you didn't seem to have this much trouble putting that one out, or Legend Part 2, or Legend Part 1. So what is it that is so special about this release? Like, I understand artistically you always want to do better. You just always want to strive to do something that is bigger and better than what you've done before. But the problem is that this is too long. If you're fans that are sitting there with bated breath to wait this many years for the second part of an album, not a new concept, this is the end of the trilogy. And he even goes on to mention in his rant that Legend 3 Part 2 has now actually expanded to 2 discs worth of music. And we all know that Eric likes to fill up the whole fucking disc. So if he's telling you it's 2 discs long, you're looking at probably 240 minutes worth of audio.
I feel the same way about what you just said as I feel about Peter Jackson turning The Hobbit into 3 movies.
Yeah.
You take the shortest book that was written by the author and turn it into 3 movies.
To quote Tolkien himself, I feel like butter being stretched across too much bread.
Scraped.
Okay. So, like, it just doesn't work. Is the record label wrong for wanting a return on their investment? I mean, I don't agree with what they did, because this is just pure shit. What they released is literally shit. He's not wrong about that.
There's got to be some behind the scenes stuff going on. And that actually kind of hits on a little bit on what I wanted to talk about. You know, I don't think we know the whole story. Who's to say that he wasn't slow playing it because he wasn't happy with the contract, or he was wanting to renegotiate and he didn't like, how little of his, IP he was going to have when it was all said and done. I mean, I don't know if he's, quite literally signed his soul away, to make these albums with them. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure there's somebody out there that can give that answer. But stuff like that does happen in the music industry. I mean, sometimes stuff ends up on the shelf and you never see the light of day because there is disagreements, and the artist will just stop working with the record label because they're like, no, I'm not going to do that. It could have been something similar, and it could have been the record label's like, well, we're not the big boys. We got to make something, otherwise we're going to go under. So, guys, we don't have an engineering budget because we've blown it waiting for this dude to get us get us stuff for the last 7 years. Just do the best you can and in the shortest amount of time as possible and put it out there, and maybe we can recoup a little bit of what we've, the massive amount of money that we've lost because we've invested literally years, almost an entire decade, waiting for this album to come out. Right,
and I think up to that point, Saviour Machine had probably been a pretty good selling band for them. I know Massacre Records put out a lot of goth type stuff, and Saviour Machine was definitely right in the pocket there. And they put out such a huge concept, and with what Eric was saying, they're like, dude, we put all of our money into this new record. It's going to be a slam dunk. We're going to do great. And then just more time passes. And then he says, hey, I really want this record to be a slam dunk. I need more money. They send him more money. And he's like, okay, great. 2 years go by. I'm not really sure about this, guys. I think I need a little bit more money just to make it that much more perfect. And they're like, okay, let me get out the old checkbook. And then the third time he does it, 6 years have passed. And it's like, dude, we're not giving you any more money. We want an album. I was really excited whenever you called me today because I thought you were going to tell me it's done. But that's not what you're asking. You're asking me to give you more money, and we've lost money. We haven't heard anything. We have these demos that you sent us in 2004, which you told us we're going to turn into the actual songs. What do we do with that? I get where both parties are coming from because I definitely want to side with the artist. A lot of the time, the artist has a better vision of what he's doing than the record label has, no matter what. I don't want to work for free either. And I kind of feel like this record label was essentially working for free. Not even free, working at a debt because they'd already paid in. So I feel like everybody was getting screwed in this deal. So they kind of just did what they had to do.
If you think about it from their perspective, even Metallica has a deadline. What have you been doing for 7 years?
Well, when the Deftones put out their follow-up to White Pony, the Deftones self-titled, the band was fined $1 million for delivering the album late. Now, I realized that was with a major, and obviously MCM and Massacre are not a major. This is just an asinine amount of time to wait for a record, and you've got a guy that is super artistic that just won't let it go. He's George Lucasing the shit out of this product.
That's
and it hasn't
a good way to say it.
Yeah, and it hasn't even been released yet. So they did what they had to do, and honestly, the album is pure garbage. It doesn't sound good. The vocals are out of key in a lot of places. It's definitely the worst sounding Saviour Machine product to ever be released, and is not even really acknowledged by the band as an official release. And
here we are in 2018.
Here we are in 2018.
We still don't have it.
We don't have it, and we're not going to get it because Eric Clayton basically said, "We're done." He disbanded the band, and that was all we heard from Saviour Machine. Except now they've come back in 2017. They played some shows. They are doing stuff, and Eric has pretty much said, we're going to record a new album. It's not going to be Legend Part 3, Part 2.
Yay.
And that makes me so happy because now he's starting to be like, you know what? This whole situation is just bad juju. Maybe we need to just get back to the basics of being a band and recording an album that we like. And honestly, I hope that it is. I hope that it's not in the vein of the Legend stuff. I think the smartest thing that this band could do at this point, release an album of individual songs that they worked hard on, not necessarily tie them together with an overall concept, and call it Saviour Machine 3, and we'll move on.
That we'll get in 9 years.
Maybe. But maybe not. Who knows? Who knows when Eric actually scrapped the Legend 3 Part 2 concept? He could have been out before he even wrote that rant.
Right.
I don't know the full extent of it. And again, we don't know a lot of the stuff going on behind the scenes. I don't think that he's a bad dude. I just think that he got himself into a situation that became so much bigger than he was. And I believe there were also some medical issues at play.
Yeah, he had some esophageal issues,
which makes it hard to record perfect vocal takes, which is what he wants.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say, there's your explanation. Final thoughts on Saviour Machine. Jeff?
Started out good. I thought this was the machine that was going to save me. Nope. It's another broken down robot, man. End of this just was so bad. So bad. I can't even put into words, other than the fact that everybody knows me. I listen to it cover to cover whenever I do these reviews. And I hit the skip button in the double digits on the second go around. That on the Legend stuff. Saviour Machine 1 and 2 is actually really good, but the Legend stuff was horrid.
Dan, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, like what Jeff said, very good start. They had a good vibe to them. I liked the way the first two albums sounded, and I was interested at that point to hear more after I heard the first two, especially because of the massive improvement between the first and the second record. But the band did not grow exponentially like they did between those records. And again, I think that you just have a guy that got maybe too big for his britches and was just trying to deliver something that was ultimately impossible to deliver. And only time will tell if he's going to make good on that promise and release it, or if he's just going to move on. Personally, I hope that he moves on and doesn't try to go back to this concept because, like we said on the episode, it wasn't really working anyway.
You said the band didn't grow after those first two albums, and I agree. That, to me, is the real tragedy of the band. For a moment on Legend Part 1, I felt like they were going somewhere, and then they didn't. And they kind of went downhill because the production started to shift to the epic and the symphonic and the synthetic, and that doesn't do it for me. I know there's an audience for it. I know a lot of people that listen to gothic metal or gothic rock, operatic metal, whatever you want to call it. And unfortunately, most of them listen to it in the background. They don't really focus on it. So the style does not appeal to me, day to day, I do like it. I just wish this band could have done more when they started to progress.
Well said.
Jeff, what's your album of the week?
It is Aphodic by November's Doom. Love that stuff.
Dan, what about you?
Untitled by Me Without You.
Jeff mentioned it earlier. I got a Bowie vibe out of this. So I listened to The Man Who Sold the World after almost every album. So that's my album of the week.
Something else I've been checking out lately is this awesome YouTube show called Good Company with Scott Bowling. Scott Bowling is a huge friend of our show. However, he became our friend after I got into his YouTube series and we reached out to him at the 2018 Rock and Pod Expo in Nashville. Scott was good enough to do an interview with us, came back and did an episode with Bride on us. But if you haven't checked out Good Company on YouTube, you need to. Super high quality, high definition video interviews. Scott has the guys come out to his place. They record. He has had Brian Head Welch from Korn. He has had Sonny from POD. He had Michael Sweet from Stryper. These are long-form interviews, and he goes through all the albums.
LeJean from Seven Dust.
LeJean from Seven Dust. He goes through all the albums, which is something that we here at Discography Discussion very much appreciate. And you would be doing yourself a disservice if you didn't check out Good Company with Scott Bowling.
And on that note, this has been episode 89 of Discography Discussion. Thank you for listening. You can like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at discussmetal. Subscribe to our podcast everywhere you listen to podcasts, including Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher. Visit discussmetal.com for all things discography discussion, and please send questions and comments to danandjoeshow@gmail.com. If you are not a patron, you can become one at patreon.com/discussmetal. We have some sweet perks.
Give me your money.